absolutely nothing of it and weren't told anything because there simply was no information on which particular boat and where specifically it was coming from and what time. And then I was with Martin Ferris on the day the Marie Anne left Phoenix to rendezvous later with the Valhalla. And I was with him up until he literally drove to Phoenix to board the boat. So I informed the Irish authorities.
After hearing about the Marie Anne seizure, John McIntyre knew he was in trouble, though he could never have imagined just how much, for within weeks he would be wrongly in the frame for compromising the entire mission. His crew's only immediate worry, however, as they sailed back to the States, was that the Americans were on to the Valhalla as well, and that they would be waiting to arrest them on their return. But to McIntyre's amazement, in mid-October, the Valhalla sailed unimpeded back into Boston Harbor.
It was on his mind for those 12 or 13 days. You know, they're going to get us. They're going to get us. And he came up with two plans: either scuttle the Valhalla or bring it right into Boston, into a place where they'd be looking all over the place. He figured they'd be looking everywhere, up and down, in and around Boston Harbor. So where do you bring it? You bring it right up in their front door. And that's where he went, down Pier 7. That's where the U.S. Customs used to park their boat.
McIntyre should have been home and dry, but only days later, when he was picked up by police after a domestic dispute, he stunned them by giving them information about the Valhalla. Phil Brady, a senior special agent for U.S. Customs, became his handler.
He was looking for some help on his state charges, but those charges were basically minor and almost misdemeanors: leaving the scene of an accident, drunk and disorderly. To turn around and give us the information he did in exchange for getting those charges were dismissed was not a fair bargain. It was a very bad bargain on his part.
The reality is that even if he was the worst guy in the world, the John McIntyre we know at the end of his life was the John McIntyre who wanted to make himself right with God and his government. The John McIntyre who went to the police, who went to the FBI, who went to Customs and the DA, who sat down with them at great, ultimately fatal peril to himself, and said, I need a way out of this. This is not the John McIntyre I want to be. I've done bad things. I'm a good person. Good people do bad things. I need to get out of this, but I don't want to be led to slaughter like a lamb.
The FBI assured a worried McIntyre that no one would ever hear about his cooperation after the event with the Valhalla or his advance information, which led to the seizure of a Bulger Flemish ship, the Ramsland, a freighter which brought 36 tons of marijuana into Boston in November 1984.
Because of the information that McIntyre provided, we were waiting for it. And the problem was making the seizure or intercepting the Ramsland, but keeping McIntyre's identity confidential.
McIntyre, however, wasn't convinced that his activities were a secret, and shortly after the drug seizure, something or someone obviously spooked him.
He mostly stuck around the house. Yeah, my father didn't want him leaving the house because he knew, he knew that to give up, he gave up Whitey Bulger that night in the police station. He gave up the Winter Hill crew, and Joe Murray and the rest of them, all right? He had to. There was no other way around it. And when you give up guys like that, in the 1970s and the 1980s, Whitey Bulger had exclusive power in the city of Boston. He could have you killed any place, anytime, anywhere. There was no safe haven for you. I mean, if you crossed that guy, you could count your time left on a calendar.
We said, well, we could surveil him. continuously to make sure. And he said no, he didn't want that because Murray and those guys were so experienced that they would spot a tail on him, and that would even be more jeopardy for him than leaving him out there on his own. So we left him out there on his own because that's the way he wanted it.
But he knew the consequences of that.
He absolutely knew the consequences of what would happen.
Over the next few days in Boston, it quickly became clear to McIntyre that what he was doing could cost him his life. But he still spurned the opportunity to join a witness protection scheme, and instead he hatched a plan to flee America completely. With his family's support, he worked out elaborate arrangements to go to South America, but just before his departure, he allowed his guard to slip for one last and fatal time. McIntyre left his home here in Squantum on the 30th of November 1984. After telling his family he had to meet someone, he waved goodbye to his mother, and he was never seen again. McIntyre drove to a parking lot under a bridge beside the Neponset River to meet Connemara-born Patrick Nee, who, despite being one of Whitey Bulger's top lieutenants, was a man whom McIntyre trusted.
He had been warned by local police that he should stay away from the Bulger crew, that there was a huge effort to find out, who was cooperating, that his life could be in danger, and that he shouldn't be, be caught alone with them. But whether he apparently ignored that advice and went off for a meeting with Patrick Nee, and that was the last time that he was seen alive.
McIntyre's truck was eventually found with his wallet and an uncashed check on the dashboard, but there was no sign of John McIntyre. McIntyre's family had little doubt that he was dead and that his killing had been linked to the Valhalla. 5 years after his disappearance, his mother and a former attorney, John Loftus, wrote a book, Valhalla's Wake, in which they claimed that either the IRA or the British Secret Service had murdered him. But as the years went on, they too accepted that the killers were nearer home and were indeed connected to the Bulger gang, and that they had had McIntyre murdered. But when official confirmation came several years ago, there was an even more startling twist, for during a court case, it was revealed that Bulger and Flemmy, two of the biggest gangsters in Boston, were themselves informants for the FBI. Astonishingly, too, it was revealed that the FBI were returning the favour to Bulger by telling him who was ratting on his gang.
Through a lot of hard work, we uncovered that. It's been quite a secret of the FBI here in Boston for the past 30 years, that these individuals operated as top echelon informants, because Bulger and Flemmy were renowned, if you will, or if that's not the correct word, they were notorious criminals in this area. They were men known to capable of murder at the drop of a hat, who were involved in high-level drug dealing, in hijacking, in extortion, in gambling, every kind of organized crime possible at its highest level.
For several decades, while they were carrying on a life of crime, they were working for the FBI. There have been suspects in numerous murders, and there's been overwhelming evidence that the FBI failed to prosecute them and, in fact, protected them from crimes while using information from them to indict other people, rival mobsters.
No one would believe that the American government's law enforcement would ever, be partners with individuals such as Bulger and Fleming.
Turning a blind eye over
essentially turning a blind eye, not only turning a blind eye, supporting them, actively supporting them in their criminal efforts. It's clear now that John McIntyre's fate was sealed by the collusion between the FBI and the Winter Hill gang. This FBI agent, John Connolly, is alleged to have been the man who told Bulger and Flemmy that McIntyre was informing on them.
John Connolly, who retired from the FBI in 1990, was the primary handler for both Bulger and Flemmy for years. He was the guy that was supposed to be their controlling agent. He's the one that Bulger and Flemmy reported to, provided information to, about other organized crime figures in the area. Connolly himself was indicted in December on charges that he protected Bulger and Flemmy for years by tipping them to crimes, by warning them about investigations, and even by warning them about other people that were cooperating against them.
Including McIntyre?
A judge found in September, a federal judge ruled that there was reason to be concerned that Connolly may have warned Bulger and Flemmy that McIntyre was cooperating, resulting in his murder.
It wasn't until January of this year that McIntyre's body was found buried on waste ground near the busy Southeast Expressway at Dorchester in Boston. The fact that it was a member of the Bulger gang who led police straight to the grave was further proof that the Winter Hill mob had killed him. Two now withered bunches of flowers still lie at the burial spot. 3 weeks after the gruesome discoveries here, District Attorney Donald Stern confirmed that one of the bodies was that of John McIntyre. But pathologists uncovered more than just his identity, for they also revealed there was evidence that he'd been tortured. Several of his teeth had been pulled out.
It wasn't from biological breakdown of the body from being in the hole. You know, some of the teeth were missing, the back of the skull was gone, stuff like that. And you think about that, you know? And you think about how many men it would take to hold me down and pull my teeth out with a pair of pliers.
Stephen Flemmy is now behind bars, but Whitey Bulger is on the run. Recently, the FBI made him one of their 10 most wanted fugitives, with a $250,000 reward in his head. No one knows where he is. There are even rumours that he may be in Ireland. The one-time Alcatraz inmate had originally been indicted on federal racketeering charges in January 1995, but he bolted before he could be arrested, and the allegation is that the FBI agent John Connolly again tipped him off. Connolly, who could be charged in connection with John McIntyre's murder, denies that he colluded with Whitey Bulger. He says he never heard of McIntyre until after he disappeared. The FBI have also defended themselves in the growing scandal.
I've publicly stated in the past, and I think it's true of any agency, if you have an individual, either past or present, that's involved in corrupt activities, it's obviously a smear on that agency, or particularly undermines the great work that is done by the FBI or any other law enforcement. Every agency is apt to have some people that are involved in criminal wrongdoing, and in my experience, it's unfortunate because that obviously overshadows all the good that is done by the law enforcement agency.
I think until this date, we've always thought that in any law enforcement agency there could be one or two bad apples here, there, or anywhere, but to think of it almost on a systemic level, that here a large core group for an entire generation of the FBI's organized crime squad, the people who really were responsible for dealing with the worst bad guys, in fact, were incredible bad guys themselves, and in fact facilitated rather than attempted to defeat this kind of crime, and allowed it to persist in the way it did is an unbelievable thought.
The FBI have rejected suggestions that they're not doing enough to track down 70-year-old Bulger.
I have designated a task force, which is not only FBI, but made up of officers from other law enforcement agencies that are devoted full-time to tracking him. In addition to being highly mobile and dealing primarily in cash, he also has a traveling companion, Catherine Gregg, who also is wanted by the FBI for harboring a fugitive. But together, the two of them basically will depict a retired couple that is traveling around the U.S. And basically hit a lot of people as just a grandparent type of couple.
John McIntyre's family and their lawyer are furious with the FBI.
Here you got the most elite police department in the United States, and they're out killing people, or they're helping, you know. I associate with what Conley did is the same thing as pulling the trigger himself. He's lucky. He gets to walk around and breathe. My brother didn't. My brother got to sit in the bottom of a wet hole and rot.
The McIntyres are also angry with Sean O'Callaghan. Chris McIntyre's already on record as saying he would kill him if he ever met him. It does appear that the authorities in Ireland and Britain did little to dispel the myth that John McIntyre was the informer, but Sean O'Callaghan says he feels no culpability for his death.
It's probably fairly true and sensible to say that the Irish and British authorities were quite happy if people were prepared to believe it came from America. They knew nothing of the existence of John McIntyre, who they knew was not responsible for the information which led to the capture of the Maritan. So, you know, I don't think there's any moral blame on them. Now, having said all that, you know, I don't believe for a second John McIntyre should have been murdered. And you can, you know, you can feel, well, he shouldn't have been murdered, you know. I mean, he wasn't the primary mover in the thing. But at the end of the day, the IRA commissioned a gang of drug dealers to work with them, to bring guns into Ireland to kill people. And you stopped that. And, you know, John McIntyre was so much out of my control. I mean, I didn't know him, I didn't know of him, that really I couldn't feel any responsibility for John McIntyre's murder.
I have no respect for that man. I don't think they should have ever let him out of prison. Hopefully, if everything goes wrong, right, the IRA will execute him.
But can you understand why the family despise you, why the family want you dead?
Yeah, of course I can, yes. I mean, of course I can. I mean, there's no problem in, there's absolutely no problem in sort of, you look at it and you think, our son was on this ship, my brother bringing these weapons across. The British and Irish authorities are quite happy to let people believe it came from America. He ends up in a police station and he gets murdered. But I have to say, to be honest, in real terms, it's such a kind of a superficial examination of it. And I'm afraid it's mainly emotion and I'm not saying that's not understandable, but it's mainly emotion rather than reason that's driving that connection between me and John McIntyre.
In a poem in his autobiography, O'Callaghan uses the Marita Ann seizure to validate his work as an informer.
I see 7 tons of American guns and bullets towed into Queenstown, or Cove, as we call it now. My Guinness and my secret satisfy. 76,000 bullets will not shatter one limb or spatter brain on a pub floor. I finish my pint and walk the 40 yards home. It's been a long, hard week.
It's been a long, hard 16 years for John McIntyre's family. Even now, they can't dispose of his remains the way they want to, by cremation, because the authorities have insisted they should be buried in case they need to re-exhume them for any future court cases. Amidst it all, Chris McIntyre says he's proud that his brother stood up to evil.
I think what my brother did was honorable. And I'll always think that. I'll always think that. You know, Whitey Bulger is not a person that I would even think, you know, like, oh, I'm sorry he did that to Whitey Bulger. It's like saying, I'm sorry for spitting at Satan.
He went to federal agents, and the federal agents served them up as supper for the mob. And he was, you know, both literally and figuratively became their supper, and got buried in an unmarked grave with a lot of other people, and he was tortured. And people know that they screwed up. People know that they didn't protect him. People know that they have an obligation. Federal officials have an obligation to take care of their witnesses in that situation, not serve them up like they did. And I would suggest that the people that are serving them up are the people who have a lot to hide themselves, and these are the people that we're going to root out and we're going to find.